Good morning, everyone. My clock says 9, so we'll go ahead and get started. Hope you all had a great night. Sounds like there was lots of conversation and interactions, which is great. So welcome back this morning. We have a good morning of events today. I wanted to make a quick announcement before we jump in, which is that I think all the posters are still up upstairs, which is great. And as we have breaks, everyone's welcome to go continue perusing those. We do need to have them taken down by 4 p.m. today, so keep that in mind. Okay, so we're going to start off this morning with a panel discussion on operationalizing digital forestry, policy, standards, and workforce development. This is an exciting group to hear from. We've brought together perspectives from research, operations, policy, and implementation to think about how we can move digital forestry forward from innovation to practice. So we're pleased to be joined by Linda Heath, Director of Inventory Monitoring and Assessment Research with the U.S. Forest Service, Paul Cooper, Chief Operating Officer at Arbor Day Foundation, Juha Hoppa, Professor and Head of Department at the Finnish Geospatial Research Institute, and Aaron Weiskettel, Professor of Forest Biometrics and Modeling at the University of Maine. Our esteemed moderator will be Dr. Song Lin Fei, and so I'm going to hand it over to him. Thank you.
All right, well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to the panel discussion, and welcome to our panelists to be here. Well, across the conference, we have seen remarkable advances how forests can be measured, modeled, and monitored with these digital tools. But this panel is going to focus on the next question. What does it take for these capabilities, the technology, to become operationalized? And so in other words, that we are not only asking what digital forestry can do, but we're asking what it can change. And does it change, harvesting plan, or does it change the inventory system? Does it change the forest health monitoring protocol, tree planting, biodiversity protection? All these questions, right? But if it is not, where the bottleneck is at? So we want to get some of these questions asked. And if the data and data standards is there or is there not? And so we were thinking about this and ask the panel to give us some opinions about what they think. So let's start in this conversation by thinking about not all organizations are moving towards digital forestry at the same pace, at the same way, and the transition depends on the mission and scale and all that. So the first question to the panelists is that, has your organization or sector embraced or plan to embrace AI and digital forestry? So the question is that, have you guys taken any of these new tools into your sector yet? If yes, give us some examples. If not, you're thinking about how you would do some of that. So we'll start with Linda.
Thank you so much for having me speak here today. Okay, I'd like to explain my organization. As we said, I'm the Director of Inventory Monitoring and Assessment Research for the U.S. Forest Service in Washington, D.C. And that means I'm in research and development. I have oversight of the research, remote sensing and geospatial analysis research, carbon assessments, other assessments. But the main one is the Forest Inventory and Analysis Program, which is the U.S. National Forest Inventory. And not only do we have forest survey out in the forest, but we also look at timber products output and surveying that, as well as a National Woodland Owners Survey and an urban FIA. So we've had the traditional FIA plot measurements. I want to get to the answer your question, which is yes, we're getting to digital forestry, and I'd like to explain that. You know, FIA program is a partnership. Many people need the information that we provide or that we help lead to provide, and so typically, how do we have all these people who are in the U.S. who are interested in forest sector information? How can we possibly meet all their needs? And we can't meet all their informational needs. But what we can do is we typically do a strategic plan. Congress says, do a strategic plan, and we work on that. We talk to all sorts of partners, and we try to determine the kind of information that is most useful to everybody, and can we afford it? So we're really running off right now a strategic plan in 2014. We may get a new strategic plan or asked to have a strategic plan soon here if the Farm Bill text passes. But so what happens is that we adopt what we can now while still trying to meet the needs that have been stated already. For example, in terms of digital forestry, we knew we needed to move to high-precision GPS units so that we could more accurately locate the plots. When you have disturbance, you know, yes, we want the plot data, but hey, we need to know more so we could tie it to remote sensing. Now, I know some of you are thinking, well, wait a minute, I want those plot coordinates and I can't get them. But you can under certain conditions. We have to worry about security. But I just want to give one example of how we've moved forward to try to deal more with digital forestry as we go. And in the strategic plan, when we get to that, we'll see what do people want. And if there's quite a bit of digital forestry in that, then that's exactly where we'll go. Thank you.
Thank you. Paul, do you want to add?
All right. Yeah, so far on the Arbor Day side, just briefly on the Arbor Day Foundation, if you don't know, we're a global nonprofit organization. We've been around for over 50 years, and through our network of partners and colleagues around the globe, we've planted over 500 million trees in that time period. And we really have to think about solutions and opportunities to scale our work. It's all about scale. How do we scale work in community forestry? How do we scale in large-scale reforestation? So our approach has definitely been to embrace AI and digital forestry in a variety of ways, really always starting from a disciplined operational focus. So it can easy to get into the curiosity of what AI can do or what digital forestry tools can do, but we're trying to stay focused on how do we actually use these tools in a disciplined manner. So we started at our organization with really just some institutional learning first about AI. We had to address legal and security guardrails, kind of like you talked about, that we need to first understand what are the implications of using these tools, particularly the AI side. And then we progressed pretty quickly into how can we accelerate innovation through these tools. So for us, I think AI and digital forestry is really about creating both, yes, safe practices, but really measurable value and not experimentation. We want to find something that's actually going to work and to help us scale right away. So specifically on digital forestry, we've been working to build and leverage these kinds of tools for several years now. We're in partnership with the Forest Service, with commercial partners like Planet Geo. We have built several geospatial technology-based impact reporting tools. We have a solution we call a community tree distributor that really helps provide decision support for cities and organizations that want to plant in the most impactful places where the ecosystem service benefits are going to be maximized, where community benefit will be maximized. So these are just a couple of ways where we're definitely finding value and necessity out of these kinds of tools.
Wonderful. Thank you, Paul. Maybe for you, I know you're already doing lots of digital forestry, but maybe you could quickly comment on what you think are the research priorities in this area.
If I shortly talk, so that okay, this just brings FGI possibilities to do more research, but in practice, what we have been trying to do is that FGI belongs to National Land Survey, and National Land Survey is part of Ministry of Agriculture and Forestry, so we transfer all possible technology for these Finnish forestry centers so that they can apply these. And in NLS, the system is actually that this digital forestry means that we have this national laser scanning program, and NLS is responsible for organizing, and challenges are on that they get many partners funding it because it serves so many applications. But and in general AI, I was in one panel in Europe 3-4 years ago. It was during Corona time, and none of the land surveys believe that AI will change their production. But I suppose today situation is different, but they are not prepared for this.
And Aaron, you want to add stuff here?
Sure, I will try. Well, first and foremost, thanks to you and Purdue and many others that put this together. I won't be as verbose as some of the speakers yesterday, but I think it's a really exciting time for us. I think this is an important event to think about where we are, where we're going, and what the next steps are. So I think there's a lot of exciting opportunities and technologies out there. I think we're at this interesting crossroads where we have some relatively, I would say, stable technologies, as demonstrated by the implementation in Finland. But we're also at a point where, with AI and all the other technologies that are emerging, I would say that the disruptions and just the pace of change is accelerating. And I think that's the challenge, and I would encourage everyone to think about that. We're dealing with a sector that is very traditional. It has very low margins, 1% to 2% return on investment. It's very complicated to tell a nationally cohesive story. Part of my agenda is not competing with the different regions, but competing with different sectors. So ag has done this really well. Even though you might have cotton, corn, soybeans, whatever the gamut is, they can tell a cohesive story, whereas forestry, it's southern pine versus spruce fir in Maine versus Douglas fir, and so I think we're at an interesting kind of point in that I would describe these as all forest health issues or forest technology issues. And another thing from ag is they don't talk about R&D, they talk about innovation. I think what we have here is a lot of innovation and implementation. And the other thing is they always talk about the farmer first. And I think we often think about the technology and then try to find a home for the technology. So part of this, I would encourage people to think about the forester first, what those implications are. So like what I talked about yesterday, some of the primary challenges I see, and I'm lucky because I get to interact with a lot of different agencies across the US, is really about the future conditions, not necessarily about the current conditions. That's what's going to drive investment management. It's also about the scalability, as Paul highlighted, being able to work at 10 acres as well as 1 million acres is important. And I would also think about it's the accuracy versus cost trade-off. We can do really fancy things on a single tree basis, but it's really about how much does that cost and how do we take that technology forward. So AI is a player. I think the earlier that we can adopt it is better, and I think it's forums like this where we can talk about our broader community and the innovations that are happening. It's exciting.
Well, thank you, Aaron. This is really a nice transition to the next question that I have for you guys. You know, in forestry, sometimes we thinking that we don't have data, but at this moment of the, given more of the sensors and stuff are getting available, we might get in more data. Maybe some organizations are getting more data that they can handle. But the question here is that, do you think you guys, for the sectors that you're representing, that have enough data? If no, what kind of data you hope to get more? If yes, where do you think the largest gap exists that between have these digital forestry related data and to make the better forest decisions? So the question is that, do you have enough data? And if you do, how to make it the operational? If you don't, what data do you want to see? Anyone?
I can
Yeah.
start.
Oh,
Yeah. I would first answer is no, I don't think we have enough data. We are, in our organization, our geospatial team is constantly being asked for more information. Where can I find this? It's every time someone reads another article, another news story, it's where's the data behind that? So I think we have an organization that is incredibly hungry for information, and they're a very popular group, the geospatial team, trying to find those answers for them. So on the one hand, there's a lot of demand for data. On the other hand, I do think the largest gap is actually not the absence of data. People do have enough data, but it's how do we make that data operational? How do we make it operational? So the distance between having the available data and then actually putting it to good use is really where I think the challenge is. And so we have to, I think what I think about a lot is balancing the hunger for data for, okay, what is actually the value that's going to be provided from that data, and helping people use data effectively. So what's the reason for it? Is it for prioritization of work? Is it for long-term monitoring? Is it for workflow acceleration? Like, what is the use case? So we're trying to drive people not just to ask for more, but to really think about how are you going to use that information. So I think that's part of it. And then the other piece I'll just mention is an opportunity I see is for better interoperability for data. All of the data sets that are out there do not talk to one another in a standardized way. And for an organization like us that's trying to scale across the globe, with working with hundreds of different partners, getting data that is not able to talk to each other or is not aligned is a real challenge, and it just adds overhead to the work. And so I think we would advocate for as much consistency in frameworks, in metadata, just so that we could make it much easier to sort of build either a national picture or even a global picture of certain kinds of data across this sector. So yeah, those are a few thoughts.
So you actually said that about do you have data, but what is the gap? I suppose the gap is there that at least in Finland we don't have endless forest resources, and they are multiple. I mean that multiple use of forest has been many decades the Finnish point of view, and so there are a lot of ecosystem services. They are competing with the same resources, and basically that is where you need the data. If you have endless resources, then it doesn't matter whether you have data. You just cut or do whatever you like for it. But I think that this optimization of forest use for different ecosystem services, even though the forest owner basically decides what to do, but that is basically what also the society needs. And this is especially important in a Finnish condition where we have this every man's rights to use the forest for their own purpose. Of course, that doesn't mean that I can cut some other trees, even sometimes do, but basically it's about this like berries, mushrooms, if you have permission hunting, and you can do hiking, all kind of things. So this is about where is the gap. And you need to fill this gap with a lot of data and to help the decision making.
So there's a lot of competing interest and then limited resources and how you maximize the. Aaron, you want to add anything?
I was going to wait for Linda. All right.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is a tough question. I think we're obviously in the era of massive data. I think Paul said it well, is how do you interconnect and build frameworks that rely on the data. And again, I would just reemphasize that we're in this era of rapid change. I've only been in the business 25 years, but just going from pen and paper to now fully digital to now AI doing something in the background that we may not even see is pretty incredible and encouraging. So I go back to our Perseus. It's got to be back to first principles, and I would say our first principles are measurement, modeling, management, and the key one that I think right now, not really a technological issue, it's a mindset issue. And I think we really need to, for me, again, I'll harp on innovation. I think we face, as a sector, just a branding issue. I think we're viewed as traditional, very boots on the ground as a mantra. And so what I what we try to do is engage, and I think Purdue has done a good job of this, is engage this younger generation about solving environmental issues and doing that through technological innovation. And that's a much different casting than I think this sector has historically been. We find it resonates much better with this cohort. So I think we have data. It's about tools, and then using those tools to build connections and build. What I also see is there's like an ecosystem, not only the forest ecosystem, but the innovation ecosystem that's happening. Seeing the vendors here, whether it's software, hardware, technology, I think it's all exciting to think about. I think it's got to think about this end use and where we want to capitalize on. I agree this ecosystem services and broadening what it means to manage a forest and for what purpose is important. I think, again, we deal with two fundamental challenges. The value of our resource as that changes with markets, whether it be carbon or fiber, but also the long-term horizons that we have to deal with, and certainty that creates. It's relatively easy. I'll say that as a farmer, you can basically plant corn the next year, see how it does, and then switch the following season. Whereas a forest, whether it's natural or planted, that's a long-term investment that's going to see decades of change. So thinking about how to be nimble and flexible with that information as we have data streams flowing in.
So this was sort of mentioned, but I'm not sure we always have the right data. So I'm always thinking about, so my perspective is the Forest Inventory Analysis Program, how the most data value for the most people on this. And so what I see is changes. For example, right now, wildfire is a really big topic. Disturbance and wildfire is a big topic. Now, the FIA program wasn't really designed for a system in which we have so much wildfire disturbance. The wildfire folks, for fire suppression, they need second-by-second data all the time, and they're always getting all sorts of wonderful digital information. Now, maybe you don't consider that forestry, so there's that issue. So just to say, so we have all these needs for data for these disturbances, and the emergencies are such that, we sort of, they seem to have sort of this endless budget, whereas traditionally in inventory, what we tried to do was minimize the cost and get the greatest value for the data, for the information we needed. And so the paradigms are different. So the forest sector is, so there's all these different stories out there. I think that's what we were trying to say too here. One other thing is that I think is really important, and because I see it all the time, is we also really deal with the land use sector or the land use land cover. The FIA program needs to measure or estimate the area of forest land in the United States and the forest becoming non-forest and non-forest becoming forest. And the remote sensing technologies come in and they look at land cover, and then all of a sudden we've been in this debate for like 40 years now is exactly what's going on. Oh, there's deforestation in the southeastern US. No, that's just forest management. So there's a lot there that I just put out there, but so there's a lot to talk about that weren't issues, say, 10 or 20 years ago. And I'm not sure the FIA program is going to be able to get data for everybody on these.
Yeah. Linda, I do have a follow-up question on that particular. When do you, like FIA is, for those of you who don't know FIA stands for Forest Inventory and Analysis, and this is a lot of if you are in academic, like that's the data that it's the best data out there, right? But the question for you, Linda, is that like we see a lot of the digital technologies out here. Do you feel there's have some feel about how you make a decision in terms of, hey, these new measurements are mature enough, maybe they're not become part of the FI protocol? Or is that more a user-driven, if there's need, I'll do it, or if it's in the tech, like, we can do more than just 0.1 acre at a time. what is your thought about like how FI would adopt, mature technology?
So my understanding is it's sort of like, what's our process to
Yeah, yeah.
decide whether technology is mature enough?
Yeah.
That's exactly some issues we're dealing with right now. Oftentimes, so FIA recently released I think it's online, but it's not a true publication, maybe a white paper. We have a national science strategy for FIA, and in our program, and we talk about we have researchers too, and I've been focused more on the surveys, but we have researchers, and we are basically saying research to operations. The research that we do, let's try to see what we can do to operationalize these various needs. Lately, so I think there's several ways of doing this. One is basically, what's the consensus of the researchers working in certain areas? We have a large effort on small area estimation that a number of you are involved in, thank you, and to further that technique. And I think what the community and operationally will work together to really kind of figure out, is this good enough to standardize? Lastly, I've been trying to get, there's a National Academy of Sciences. It's a kind of a government, or it is a government kind of facility. And I thought I would like to work with them, and they actually do a very much consensus workshop with lots of professors and lots of folks coming in to talk about, okay, is this operational? When shall we adopt it? So there's several things there, and then also the whole strategic plan. Maybe you heard of a blue ribbon panel. Occasionally, there's a blue ribbon panel from industry and others who are interested in better forest information in the United States. And so the last one really was the one who said, hey, we need annualized inventories, and we went from periodic to this annual system. So that's another way, which definitely, if a blue ribbon panel came in and said, this, that, we would do that. But those people are usually researchers, operational, talking amongst themselves, and have a lot of background for that.
Wonderful, thank you. I'm going to follow up on this. This is a question I think asked for some of our students here, for you guys to think, right? Students often always ask, we need more data, I need more data, right? But can you guys quickly comment on where this is not true? Like where more data might lead to added cost or friction, or sometimes not even provide you the false sense of confidence for decision making. What is there a simple example that you have that more data is not necessarily the right way?
Perhaps I even answered that in a previous answer, so that when you have endless resources, I suppose, then you don't have any data. So in Russia, they can just let the forest burn every year, and most probably, I don't know, perhaps in Canada they have that kind of large resources, so that they just cut and take the timber what they need. But I don't know any other place. But basically it is better you have these endless resources and you don't need to do any optimization, then data perhaps is not needed. Perhaps other people want to know what they are doing in their stuff, but at least for decision making they don't need.
Any other addition?
I think it always comes down to cost benefit, right? So we've been asked and partnered with FIA to develop new biomass equations. The cost of sampling a tree was anywhere from $5,000 to $25,000 per tree. And so there's obviously a trade-off for how many trees can you get versus the improvements working at a national scale. So I would encourage to do that with our technologies. It's really difficult to break down the cost and think about scale, but identifying those pinch points. To me, not necessarily it's about more data, it's about having common data sets. And I think NASA has done a really great job of this that we might want to replicate. What they have is national test beds where all that information is public and consistent. And so that as vendors or academics come up with new ideas, we can go back and test them against kind of some standards and see how these different methods compare. A lot of what I see is it's really a lot about apples and oranges comparisons that I see a lot. It works in southern pine, but trying to transfer that to a spruce fir thicket in Maine is a much different challenge. So I think as we think about digital test beds and digital architectures, having some large areas that span ownerships, forest types, different parts of the US to test out. Because I would worry with Linda is like you take a brand new technology and then implement that in the FIA program, and we might gain some features, but we might also lose the benefits of the historical measurements that really are the foundation of what FIA was formed on. So thinking about these trade-offs and cost benefit is really where I would go back to.
I would just echo Aaron's point there. I think for us, we really take an operational lens on this. Every new report, every new dashboard, monitoring layer, we feel like it should earn its own place, so to speak, in our platforms to either reduce marginal cost or reduce friction. It has to actually play an operational role. So just having more data, we find that it can burden the field teams. We have partners that are just trying to get the work done, and asking them, for example, to collect more data in the midst of that work with limited funding is just a barrier to them actually doing the work of in our case, getting trees in the ground. So yeah, I think more data can distract and maybe mask what variables actually matter in the work that you're trying to do. So just being real clear on what it is you're trying to accomplish and the data that adds to that, not just adds burden and overhead to it.
Yes, it's really important to know what your definitions are and your standards are. One of the legislation for the FIA program, besides saying, we want you to do the survey and have an inventory and status and trends of the nation's forests, it talks about, and do this annually and 20% every 5 years, aspirational amount of plot measurement, and then have a 5-year report. But it also says national definitions and standards. And so the program is legislated to work with states to come up with what is forest land. And I could say we could probably work on that a little bit more, by the way. But anyhow, I think that we sometimes, again, have data can be very distracting. That people, oh look, here's some new data that's from JEDI or from Sentinel or all the different technologies out there, and then they say, oh, what can we do with this? And so they sort of try to shoehorn it in as forest land when maybe it isn't, or this land use land cover issue that we have that always pops up in policies. So from my point of view, we need design. What happened to our experimental design when we do work instead of, oh, there's some data, what can I do with it?
Yeah.
So I would appeal to just, let's be thoughtful, I guess, and
Maybe
strategic.
that's very nicely lead to our next question I want to ask you guys about is this, right? So when we talk about digital forestry and then even our mission area, we talk about, well, digital forestry is in a very broad term. It can be spanned in urban forestry, which Paul, like you guys are mostly dealt with. We have the rural, forest, and we have some of the plantation, the industrial forest, and then the other purpose of conservation, and now they have different public agencies might have different goals, wildlife management, nonprofit, like all those mixture of things, right? So are we trying to build something in a one shared digital system platform so we have either communication among sectors, or do you see there's different, obviously different sectors have different needs and stuff. So how you think we can best to optimize while customize, and what sort of the biggest need in your view, in your sector that is needed? Anyone? Yeah.
So if you compare this sector with a built environment and city areas, so in city areas, all this mapping is, we have like a city GML, we have level of details, we have clearly defined what is level of detail of 0, 1, and 2, and so on. So what is missing in forest sector is similar definition and similar standards. I have only seen one paper from 10 years ago where this is proposed. But that could help. I mean that when you work in different areas, so most probably it could be level 0 could be like this is forest area, this is non-forest. Level 1 could be, I don't know, like you can go to like stand level inventories and then you go, I don't know what level is individual tree, but then you may have like even a point cloud, semantic segmentation of tree, you may have quality and health and these issues. But if you have that kind of global standardization or level of details defined, then it would help.
So you advocating for some level of consistency?
Yes.
Really?
Yes.
Yeah.
I would agree. I think we in thinking about this, I think if there were a standard foundation that would just enable so much efficiency in our work, we work in more than 50 countries around the world. Everybody thinks about their foundation differently. Where are they coming from? What's their baseline of data? And so if there were standardization across that foundation, I think would be fantastic. But we also believe that every implementation of that foundation would need to be context specific. So the actual partners that we work with, they have different needs, they have different workflows, they have different capabilities. So I don't think any one identical tool set or would work, right? So I think you need a shared ecosystem that's interoperable, and then implementations of that work that is unique to maybe different components of the industry. So urban partners would use it one way, global reforestation in another. So one foundation, but lots of implementations of how to deliver that.
Can you give a little bit more insight in terms of if you would have wish, what would it be this cross foundation or cross sector foundation standards you would like to see?
Yeah, let's see. I mean, I think the land use definitions is probably a big one. Where we even talk about what is a tree. Sometimes is that a shrub? Is that a tree? So just some definitions like that could be really helpful. And I think the different variables that go into an ecosystem, standardizing those. I think about this largely from an impact reporting. What is going to be the impact if we put trees in a certain location? And so the variables that define what that impact could be, I think is one example of what would be great to be standardized across. I think things like iTree are doing a good job in trying to standardize some of those definitions. But if we could get to one where those things are just commonly accepted across the industry, it'd be great.
Yeah, I think terms matter. So we kind of have digital forestry, and that means lots of different things. And obviously, as highlighted, I think we've seen lots of different variations of what that is. To me, I'd like to think broadly. I think forestry is a little bit of a dated term and doesn't undersells what we do in terms of, as we heard, water, carbon, risk mitigation. I think there's a lot that somehow we need to capitalize on and showcase. And I would also say it also needs to have a purpose, right? Digital for what? So I think that gets to some of Paul's point. So it's a good term, but maybe we need a underlying model or vision of where this is and what we do. Because I think we try to undersell where we are, and I'm always trying to advocate for this sector. It's by far the most difficult in that our markets are dynamic. We're not dealing with one single species or just a handful of species. We're dealing with different organizations all the way from the small private landowner to large multinational corporations and everything in between. And we do long-term investments with targeted management. So somehow conveying that complexity without overwhelming people, I think, is important. And I really feel like we're at this important point that we can really emphasize the importance of forests, like the forest to faucet idea, or just other ways of packaging this so that it matters to that large portion of the population that may never even interact with a forest in an urban setting. So I think we've seen some trends, particularly in New England, about this kind of this perspective on forest management and the role of managed forest. And I think it's important for us to write our own narrative and be out in front of these societal pressures, I guess.
Yes, it's definitely societal pressures, and this is a little of a side, but not, I think it's important. A few years ago, well, probably like 20 years ago, there was a movie that came out, a video about celebrating the Forest Service's, U.S. Forest Service's like 100 years celebration, and during this film, they went through and they kept saying, what is the greatest good? Because that's what the Forest Service was trying to find, the greatest good for the greatest number for the longest run. That was really the thinking that permeates the agency at that time and probably still does. But during its inception through the 100 years, and and so it just goes through, what is the greatest good for who? And it's almost like, what is the best data set here? And can we all get together for the same data set? But near the end of this film, they were interviewing a history professor who said the Forest Service should and can and must continue because the problems that it grapples with are really the problems of society. When you really look at all the different things that we deal with out on the ground, managing forests, and it's not just the Forest Service. Forestry is about the land, it's people, and all the benefits, it's wildlife, and so there's all this to think about, and it is hard to characterize. So I guess I just made the problem even more complex. But getting back to the data, in fact, I said this yesterday to somebody, about this notion of can we have standards and kind of one shared data, or how well can we share this data? And I think that it is more difficult and complex world. I think that we need more communities of practice, shall I say, for data, where I sure hope that something like the forest inventory and analysis can continue, where we have agreement among many people about forest definitions and how can we get some basic data and observations to people when they need them. But I believe there's going to be this other little communities as well who have special needs, and they're going to have to handle them kind of at that level. That's what I'd like to offer.
Wonderful, wonderful. I think, at least from myself, from hearing this, I think I can speak on, for some of you listening here, is that it's a time that is still a lot of confusion because of the definitions and shared, standards and so on. But it's also exciting, right? Because we are at the very early stages of this, and we get to define what we want to do. So this is wonderful. But what I'm also hearing from you guys keep saying this is that the panels are telling us, right? It's sometimes, we now have these tools, but to make the impact of the last mile, it's not the tool, but it is the implementation, right? And so it's not just about building the tool, right? We have tools, but it's about the how you're gonna make sense of it, how your organization's gonna take the tools to the next level, to the problem solving. So for that regard, I think, can you guys elaborate a little more in terms of from your thinking, from your daily actions, what is the biggest barrier to operationalizing digital forestry today? Is that you don't have, you hear these tools, but you haven't put your hands on the technology? Or is that you don't have the workforce, the people who can do that? Or is that funding or other things? What are the biggest barriers that you guys feel? Right? And then If it's technology, I think, people over here, they might, okay, I have the solution for you. But regardless, give me your thoughts on this.
Yeah, I can start. I agree with you. I think the last mile of making digital forestry work is not technological. It is that operationalization of it. How do you integrate these tools into existing workflows? How do you gain trust from the practitioners that have been doing this for 30 years to do these in new ways? And how do you align processes with these new capabilities? So, I think in forestry where decisions are very long time span, they long horizon, they're location based, and they're made often, we're trying to implement these things inside of institutions that were not designed originally around digital systems. So I think it is that operationalization is one of the most challenging things. But I don't think that stands alone. I think there's a workforce readiness component to it. The organizations that we work with on a daily basis are not data scientists and not engineers. They're foresters, they're nursery experts, they're field technicians. And so they're just not digitally fluent individuals. They're passionate about the work, passionate about the environment. And so I think that's a bridge that, again, part of that operationalizing that you have to go through. And then there's just a real tension between funding. So implementing new tools and new technologies is not free in most cases. And so often where you see funding for just on the ground getting the work done, that is stretched thin. Like Aaron said, the margins are incredibly low in many cases. So building that bridge between implementing these new tools and maintaining the work is some of the things that I think is a real challenge. Those are probably two things. I think just workforce readiness, funding capabilities, and then how do you integrate that into an industry and roles that are not traditionally based in technology.
If you think about the resources in general, so why universities, why startups are so agile and can do some new stuff is that they have quite a lot of, if they have resources, then they can use the resources very freely. So they can select the people, they can select the place, they can select the time how they use it. But when you go to operational, ongoing activities, the resources are not that free. You may have like wrong people in that way that it is like young who master like AI. They may be in the wrong place or even in wrong time. So it's not that easy. You have some running activities. So I think it's about like using the resources. So if I mean that if forestry centers or whatever, they have resources to buy hardware, they could do this kind of testing more easily, but they may have just personnel. So I think the resources, that is the key thing. And it's not easy to solve. It takes time. It just takes time. That's the fact.
Yeah. For the FIA program right now, the Forest Inventory Analysis Program in the U.S. federal government, right now is somewhat of a unique time in which I think really, I think a lot of those things are issues for many people that you mentioned, the workforce. We have a kind of a generational changing. We have funding is an issue because it costs a lot. But we also have these institutional, social, cultural issues going on where, there was a law passed in 2018 about the Federal Information Technology Acquisition. It was a Reform Act, FATARA. And it was really meant for, huge money, 20 million, $1 billion systems, AI systems for defense. And so it was more here, you have to, if you want to buy IT in the government, you have to make sure the Chief Information Officer knows this for your agency. And of course, that's laws come passed down to us until it comes down to, we practically have to report, like everything is IT. And so it's very difficult right now, at least in the agency, to purchase anything that looks like a digital forestry or collect data because of this law, but it's really institutional, social, cultural kind of issue. So that's currently what we're dealing with, and you all are living with as well, for that matter.
Yeah, be real quick, guys. I know time is short, but I think one of the things that we need to think about is frameworks. So a lot of federal agencies and private industry and venture capitalists think about TRL and ARL, so technology readiness levels and adoption readiness levels. So it's really about the intersection of how mature the technology is and are organizations ready to adopt that technology. I think they go through, as Linda's been highlighting, a strategic planning process of vetting technology. That's one of the issues that we're not so good at as a sector is having these common data sets, some standards to really put things through the test and come up with robust TRL, ARL assessments and do the cost-benefit analysis. I see this really as a Wild West. We're all out here doing things, trying to promote our technologies, our services, and we have to be, I think as a sector, we need to celebrate our successes more, but as individuals, I think we need to lessen the over-promising and think strategically about how our relationships with partners, others affect. I interact, again, I'm lucky, I get to see a snapshot of the forest sector from a variety of perspectives and work with industry partners. I know every day they are hounded by sales people offering them the next solution and the best thing. And again, we got to recognize this is a very traditional business, and that I think they felt they were burnt 10, 20 years ago by the overpromise of remote sensing. They're just shyly getting back into the game again, and now we're promising this next set of goods, whether it be carbon or whatever the next technology is. And I think we just have to be careful, because that's a fragile relationship, just given the cost of doing these transactions. So I think strategically, if we can vet this technology internally, build the tools, and build the dialogues, I think that's where we're at. As an academic, that's what I pride myself on, is offering my services, my knowledge, to be able to help others, to build that trust and to help that technology through the.
And that's a great point, and I want to inject my own opinion here, is that I think, over-promising is an issue, but others, the messaging issue. Because forestry is in a field that, especially we sometimes call them muddy boots foresters. These are people with extensive experiences. These are the field that, whether it's in the urban inventory or this natural forest, these are people that are well respected by the community. And sometimes we need to be careful what we promise, and we need to make it clear. These robots or these AI, these drones are not replacing the traditional forest. What we're doing here is that we're giving the tools to the professions. They're adding another tool in their toolbox. So I think that's a critical message that we should have. Now I'd like to open up this to the audience, that if you have questions for the panel. So we have a few mics ready. So raise your hand if you have a question for the panel. Is it okay? Over here.
Hi. What do you think the next steps are to make these digital tools affordable or even accessible to foresters? Like, if there are already tools out there that they can use, how do we educate them on how to use them?
I think de-risk is the biggest one, and whether that's selling kind of what the end goal is, or doing this ARL, TRL assessment. I think as much as we can internally vet these products, work with our federal partners or other organizations to implement and test run these things, I think that's critical. I think, just for an example, I was spoken to a private landowner, and they were getting cost estimates to do just basic inventory plots ranging from $50 to $100 to $1,000 a plot. So Obviously, what they're going to pick is probably where that cost benefit comes in. So if you're offering $1,000, really, what is that tenfold gain in information that's gonna get you? And I think, again, it's not necessarily about the technology; it's about the cost of implementation. So finding efficiencies, finding partnerships, and continuing to refine is important.
Thank you.
Question.
Linda, you mentioned experimental design. I just kind of wanted to see if you could sort of unpack that for some of us a little bit. You said we kind of got away from that, right? And that instead we started looking at what can this data do for me? Do you remember when you mentioned that earlier about experimental design? I just wanted to see if you could sort of expand on that a little bit for some of us, for more context.
More context about experimental design and what I was saying there. Well, the question was really about, do we need more data? What are there gaps and whatever? And so I don't know about you, but sometimes what I see people doing is, we want to know something about what the vegetation across the landscape, and so look, ISAT-2 came out. This new satellite came out, and we could use that information. How will that help us? And I just maybe I'm around the wrong people, but I see people kind of going through different kinds of sensors and the information from them, and trying to figure out what problem they can solve, perhaps, and whatnot. When perhaps maybe it would be better to think about defining the problem that you're really trying to solve, and then looking around at what's there and thoughtfully kind of choosing how to figure out how to solve that problem. Who was it that said, 90% of your effort in solving a problem is really in defining the problem, and then 10% is actually working through it to get to that solution. And I think sometimes we don't necessarily define the problem well enough before we rush off trying to find a solution, and we need more data, is what I was trying to get at, if that's helpful.
You out of time? We can have one more question or two.
Oh, go ahead.
Okay. So I have a question to Paul. So my concern sometimes is about technology, use of technology, because there's academia skeptical about using fast-changing technology, but this is a trend. So my question is, making partnership with academia, do you have the most up-to-date successful story and failing story? I want to hear about that.
Yeah, so sorry, a little hard to hear you, but so what are maybe some of the successful partnerships that we have with academia to bring some of these technologies to bear? Yeah, I think one, we are always looking for more partnerships. We are at our best when we're partnering with those that do this work incredibly well, do it every day. So that's part of it. I think we're always trying to bring different viewpoints into our ecosystem. He's here in the room, but actually we just hired our first senior scientist in the Arbor Day Foundation from academia, because that is a viewpoint and a lens that we need to have, I think, as we better define where we're doing our work and where we're not. So I think, I think we just want to bring every viewpoint under the tent that we can. So we're not really, I can't think of any one specific example of where this is a partnership with research that has brought specific outcomes to life, but we're always looking for those opportunities, and we want to find ways to do that. I think it's about, if we can bring a viewpoint to academic work, so if you are thinking about something, how might this be deployed in the industry, inside the sector, that would be a conversation we would love to have, because We have so many interactions and connections across both rural forestry and urban. We have places where we can deploy ideas. We have ways in which we can take data sets or take theories and apply them in a situation, in a given project, and see what happens. So I think I'd say we're always looking for those partnerships to do that work.
Well, for the interest of time, we're going to stop over here. Let's please join me, thank the panelists to share their insight. Thank you. You have announcement.
Okay, so I won't, we're into a break, so I won't keep you long, but I did want to direct traffic a little bit here. So thanks especially to the panel and the moderator for a thoughtful conversation. We're at the start of a 15-minute break, and then at 10:15, we're going to transition into our second parallel session, and that will be just like yesterday. We'll have session A in the North Ballroom here, and then sessions B and C will be in the Stewart Center, just where they were yesterday, so hopefully you can find your way back to whichever of those you would like to go to. Following the parallel session, we will have another 15-minute break, and then we will resume in the North Ballroom here at 11:30. So hope you can all find your way back by 11:30. All right, let's thank our panel again. I hate to cut off the lively conversations, but time and tide wait for no one. All right, so we're going to get started with our third and final plenary session focused on digital twins and decision support systems. Our first speaker is Dr. Jinha Zheng from the School of Civil Engineering here at Purdue University. We'll be talking about from canopy to cloud, scaling forestry research with the data to science platform. Let's welcome Jinha.
Good morning, everyone. Oh, this is a very nice mic. And today I'm going to talk about from canopy to cloud and how we can actually scale this digital forestry research using this open source project platform called the data science. And we've seen this theme going on throughout this conference. Everything starts from being able to see something that you've never seen before. And this is mainly done by using some of the advanced sensor technology. Turning our clock back about 600 years ago, something amazing happened. This is when we had a printing press, technology being developed. And before this printing press technology, this text information has been only available for a small group of people. But with this technology, this text information becomes available pretty much to everybody. So before this printing press, everything is handwritten books, and it takes months to copy a single textbook, and it takes a lot of time to produce this information. And because of this limitation, this text knowledge remains to a certain group of people or where this text information is being generated. But after this printing press, now generating this or disseminating this text information becomes very, very easy. And now we have a library everywhere around the corner where you can access all this text information very, very easily. Then how about your geospatial data in digital forestry application? How this is relevant to this analogy that I'm making about printing press technology over there. And traditional motion sensing platform start from satellite images. It has tens of meters in resolution. Sometimes I think this is better now, but the weeks of revisit time, so you're not going to have to see anything in between. You have a high resolution aerial the platform where you can collect the airborne data, imagery and LiDAR, etc. Oh, sorry. Commercial satellite and the airborne platform. So these are the more traditional platform that you can take advantage of. But the more modern remote sensing platform, now you have a drones, makes it easy for you to collect the data set. Mobile laser scanners and the terrestrial laser scanners becomes available, so that now we can collect much higher resolution data set much more easily than before. And this new technology makes helps you to see something that you were not able to see before. Before this drone technology, you're going to see things in resolution of meters. Now with this technology, we're talking about in the centimeter resolution. Sometimes it takes days for you to get the data set, but now we're talking about as a matter of hours you can get the data set right now. And those traditional platform that takes millions of dollars for you to operate, but now we're talking about thousands of dollars for you to collect the data set. And because of this, the modern remote sensing technology, now every graduate student or every lab members here can become a data generator, essentially. So being able to see something that you're not able to see before is great, but more important part is that you should be able to share the data set with others that you collected. And I'm going to make an analogy of watching our video content. So this is a movie theater. We all like to want to watch a movie. And if you look back a few, probably 10, 20 years ago, this is how we were consuming our video content.
Imagine the perfect video store. It would have a great selection, right? Right. Over 10,000 videos. 3 evening rentals, so no rush, no hassle. Fast checkout. 24-hour quick drop return. Open late every night. Well, the perfect video store.
Welcome to Blockbuster Video.
Is popping up
You all
all
remember
over the
this,
country.
right? A lot of you in this room.
There's one near you.
So for you to watch a movie, you need to go to the Blockbuster. Drive there and hoping that the movie that you want to watch is going to be available. Pick it up, come back, put in your the player, watch a movie, and drive back, return, get another one. Something magical happened probably about 10 years ago. You might be laughing at something magical, but this is what has happened.
There's a better way to rent movies. As many as you want for just $20 a month, and no late fees. Go to Netflix.com, make a list of the movies you want to see, and in about 1 business day, you'll get 3 DVDs. Keep them as long as you want, without late fees. Then when you're done, look, prepaid envelopes. Return one, and they'll send you another movie from your list. It's easy.
So remember those days?
Netflix.
I remember, I bet
All
you
the
that
movies you want,
part of,
$20 a
Netflix
month,
membership
no
at the
late fees.
time. I went to the website, click, and I'm gonna get DVD, mailed to me in a couple of days, watch it. Of course, you don't need to drive, but still, it takes days to do it. How we are consuming our video content now, of course, none of this is happening anymore. You just, sit down your, the couch, you just, click your button, your movie plays, right away. This is almost same as innovation that we had in, printing press. The time for you to, access to this type of information becomes, instant, right away. And this is in 3 eras of, watching movie, store run, and the red envelope, which is an old way of envelope. Now everything is streaming from cloud. And this Netflix, made innovation so that you can consume video content that is generated by a big studio. This is great, but you also know everyone else using this another platform that I'm going to talk about, which is YouTube. This is your video content that is created by you. And my analogy here is that this, Netflix is more like a big geospatial data content the creator, like the NASA, ESA, surveying firms, USGS, USDA, and etc. They are the one who is generating massive high quality data set, national one. They make it available. They have a platform to do so. But what about your own content that you're creating, which is in a drone data set? And we don't have any such platform where you can make your own data set, make it available. So what I'm trying to hear is that you or UAV data is more like your own video that can be uploaded to the YouTube, but we don't have such ecosystem to do so. So how you are sharing your data set with others? I'm just making an analogy of those, the video content. Are you a hard drive run, the category where you're just going to your colleagues office, plug this in hard drive, copy the data, come back to your office? Or are you a Dropbox queue in a category where you're going to be unloaded, the colleague is going to download it? Or do we have a way we can consume our geospatial data more like in a Netflix or in a YouTube, streaming from the cloud? And the key idea of this data science platform is that we want to provide this kind of ecosystem where anybody who's creating this geospatial data content can upload your own data and share with others without any restriction. So that's the reason why we create this website. This is an open to public. You can manage your own data set. You can share with others. You can also analyze this data as well. And this is in a live example. So this is in a QR code. If you scan it using your smartphone, you're going to be encountering something that you've never seen before. This is the data set collected in Ecuador, Tipitini Biodiversity Station, which is known to be the most biodiverse location in the world, based on paper the published in Nature. And I don't have a screenshot, but you're going to be able to see it. You can just zoom in, and this is about 170 gigabytes in size. The file that you're looking at, we are streaming everything over the network. We have another QR code. This is in a 3D point cloud. We also collected the drone data, LiDAR data. You can also stream your point cloud data set to your smartphone right away. And the beauty is, this is almost like watching a movie on a Netflix. You are not downloading anything. You are streaming everything from the cloud. Being able to share is great, but we are all here doing a research. If you cannot analyze your data set, it means nothing. It might be fun, but you cannot do any research. So, coming back to this, 3 punchline that I'm talking about, being able to see that you have never seen before, being able to share this data set with others, but unless you can analyze this data, we cannot make an innovation. And most of the big AI the algorithm out there, one of the most fundamental requirement is you need to have an access to the big data set. And this data science platform is going to provide such a ecosystem where you can access to this big geospatial data set without downloading any single data product to your computer. And there is a very popular principle called FAIR. I think some of you all may already know. It is not the literal meaning of being fair. FAIR. That is an acronym. And F stands for findable. Your data set should be able to findable. If this is only findable to you, it means nothing. Second one is accessible. Your data should be accessible to by others. And a lot of people, you think that accessible means that I should be able to download it. In my opinion, that is not enough, because you're going to spend a lot of time to download it. You should be able to access this data set in a programmatic way so that you don't have to download the whole piece, but you can programmatically select the data set and access those data set. And I think in all your panel discussion this morning, Paul made a very important the point here that your data set should be interoperable. If your data set only talk to yourself, what's the meaning of it? And this data should be in the data set interoperable as well. And the last R is reusable over there. And this data science platform is designed with this FAIR principle in mind. And some of those additional extensions we develop here is that we have a QGIS plugin so that you can access every single data set that is in data science through the QGIS platform. And also this data set can be made accessible in ArcGIS environment as well. We have a Python module, so that you don't need to download any data. You can write a Python code to access this data, analyze it. And we also have, I think some of you might see this in iForester booth over there. This iForester app has been integrated in our ecosystem so that any of those field measurement is going to be available in this ecosystem as well. And we also have a catalog where you can publish your data set. And all the data set in this system is your data set. You have a full control, but if you decide to publish, this becomes available in a catalog, and anybody can come here, they can query, and they start to use data set right away. And we also had agreement with AWS. I think AWS group is over here as well, and agreement with the AWS, and AWS provided 1 petabyte of storage on AWS and OpenBucket so that we can make this data set public and available as well. So overall, this data science platform provides all the way from the data collection, data management, sharing, visualize, analyze, and publish, open architecture. And this, as of right now, we have almost 1,400 users on this platform. There's almost 1,300 project has been created. More than 4,000 flight has been uploaded to this platform, and more than 11,000 data product. In total, right now, I was checking right before I coming to this stage, there is about 43.7 terabyte of data contributed this ecosystem. And this is the map of all those 1,300 projects created all over the world. This is not only from North America. It is coming from everywhere, everywhere in the globe. So I'm going to ask you a question. Are you a geospatial content creator? Meaning that are you collecting any of the drone data, or are you making any geospatial data yourself? Whenever we have a video content, at least to me, I don't think anywhere else. I just upload my video content to YouTube. It gives me full control how I want to share my video with others, and who can I have an access to, and etc. If you're a geospatial content creator, now you can come to Data to Science platform. This is an open to public. You can upload your data set, and you can just make it available and do innovation from there as well. Here's the team who contributed this Data to Science platform project. And I think most of these team members here are already in this room. And this is my lab members. I'd like to thank to my lab members as well. With this, I'm going to finish my presentation. Go to this d2s.org website. There's a ton of information there. Thank you.
All right, next up, we're going to continue on the theme of developing tools with end users and stakeholders in mind. And so we'll welcome Leslie Bobby from the Southern Regional Extension Forestry at the University of Georgia, talking about building digital forestry tools with, not for, stakeholders' perspectives from intended end users. Thank you. Yep. Let's go.
All right. Thanks, everybody. I know we're wrapping up here today. I'm going to be presenting a lot of data from my colleagues, so any mistakes are my own and not theirs, and translating it. So I'm just going to briefly talk about a big and ambitious project, how the many moving pieces are part of their project, stakeholders, needs, and perceptions, and then wrap it up with a tidy bow, but maybe not with as elegant of an analogy as Jinha did. So I'm part of the Promoting Economic Resilience and Sustainability of the Eastern U.S. Forests, so the Perseus Project with the fancy acronym. And it's scientists from 3 institutions, many disciplines, with the goal of developing digital tools to help landowners and forestry professionals across the eastern U.S. manage their land. And I like to think of the goal as to continue to grow happy big trees. So if anyone doesn't know who this is, just ask somebody else. So it's 3 institutions, many disciplines. I can tell you I've never coded a single thing, except I did have a computer science class in the early 90s. So that tells you what my coding experience is. But I'm an extension and outreach, so I'm trying to communicate things to people. So we got a lot of different things going on: engineers, economists, social scientists, geospatial scientists, different departments, even within an institution. So it's a lot. So the goals of Perseus and the project objectives is, create a set of digital tools and forest mapping products, create a modeling framework, and co-design management tools, and also establish educational and training programs, so address some of those workforce development things, so as well as training the stakeholders. And I'm just going to focus a little bit on the co-designing of management tools. But all these things all work together, and all these different folks work together. So, so our project objective is to bring everyone together and try and de-silo us, which is always a challenge, and we have to constantly work on it. But I'm part of the extension and outreach team, and kind of our strategy is to create awareness about digital forestry and the tools and technology, and then to educate stakeholders about them, and then inform tool developers about any stakeholder needs, or to help smooth the way so they can get feedback as they keep developing. But in addition to creating that connection to developers, just creating awareness about the tools and educating people about the tools, so the stakeholders who are not in the know, it'll help so when the tools are launched, then they're actually already ready to use them and they're willing to use them. So digital forestry is a lot of new technology and a lot of change. This is someone, the picture on the left shows someone taking a tree sample, or tree core. They're still doing that. They did that 100 years ago. So while we have a lot of innovations in forestry, we also have a lot of standard things that we've done for a really, 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 really long time. So when you look at technology, we're going from this, which we still do and we still will do, to this, and it's a big change. So data are being collected, especially for this project, and tools are being developed so we can access the data in a user-friendly format, which is what Jinha showed us. But who are the tools for? So we say the tools are for people who own or manage the 740 million acres of forest land in the US, though granted we are focusing more on the eastern US. So who owns the forest in the United States? So we have publicly owned forests, and that means governments from every level, from your city governments, county, state, et cetera. And collectively, they own only about 40% of the forest land in the US. Whereas privately owned or private landowners, which includes a lot of people from families to individuals to corporations, companies, trusts, et cetera, they own about 60% or 420 million acres of all the land in the US. So, in some other countries, that's not the case, but in the US, we have a lot of private landowners who can choose to do what they want. But, this means that there's different landowners of all kinds with different levels of sophistication. So, forest landowners could be your grandpa. It could be, the person down the road who, really could tell you every single tree in the woods, but maybe couldn't tell you how to use their iPhone. So, but it also includes the professionals who manage the forests, so foresters. It includes people who are part of companies which, have greater access to things, and, government agencies and things. So one of the questions is, will they want and use the tools? So we can build tools. I like memes, I like old references. This references an old movie where they talk about if you build it, they will come. Well, you can build lots of things, but people won't necessarily go use them because they may not be what they're looking for. And so we want to say, will you really use these tools if we just build them by ourselves? So what we're doing in the extension team is, creating awareness, educating stakeholders, and then building opportunities for practitioners who are stakeholders to co-produce the tools. So, it's a nice loop, and then it comes back around. So we needed to find out what the stakeholders want and need in order to use or accept digital forestry tools. And that starts with what do they think and know about digital forestry technology or AI? Do they trust the tools or data? And what would they want in a tool? And what are their concerns about these tools? So we have to want to find that out, and our extension team, and so we wanted to ask them. So we've done multiple surveys and some studies, and then we've been doing a lot of informal feedback, because you can always ask and have discussions. So we've surveyed landowners twice, 2 different surveys going across the area. This is a picture of my colleague, Erica Kronenberger. She's been speaking at multiple conferences, landowner meetings, and things like that. And she has a little survey that she posts where she gives them an opportunity to offer feedback or be available to offer feedback, which I should have linked here, but I forgot to. And then we've talked to forestry experts via a Delphi study and then forestry businesses. So, like I said, landowners, there's all sorts of landowners in the the US and across the world, of course. And they have multiple objectives. So one of this survey was conducted in 2024 across the eastern US with 926 participants. And you can just see the range of objectives that landowners have. So some want to maximize revenue, some want to maximize wildlife habitat, but pretty much everyone has multiple objectives. So this is not a percentage. This percentage of people said that they like that particular objective. It's not a percentage of the total, because you would see that adds up to more. But yeah, they have different things. And it changes state by state. So our project deals with Indiana, Maine, and Georgia specifically, but it's very different landscapes for forestry, different people who are managing it in different ways. So a second survey conducted, and I think it was last year, was looking at trying to create some typologies to kind of classify these landowners. So overall, they found that they classified ownerships in categories of people who are just individuals, owners who own jointly with their spouses, or people who own with their family or friends, or family or trust or estate or something like that. And so these were more of the smaller landowners rather than the bigger landowners, or I'm sorry, rather the non-corporate landowners, the non-industrial private landowners. The average age of these landowners, 68. So, they're not spring chickens, and 68 doesn't mean that they're not good with technology, but, I would say fewer are. But, 70% of these landowners had more than 100 acres. But only 20% have a written management plan, which is kind of interesting. And you can see the percentage by state from this survey. So nearly 50% of the people who answered the survey are in Indiana, and as we've seen, Indiana has a lot of cornfields, and then it has forests like kind of tucked in there, so that might influence the responses. But in this survey, a lot of the questions were perspectives on digital technology and concerns. So an example was, generally speaking, I would be willing to allow someone to collect information about my woodland using these different methods. So traditional methods, you can see only 60% roughly of these landowners were actually willing to let someone else collect information on their woodlands using traditional methods. So it's interesting that they were almost just as comfortable having satellite images or from LiDAR or RGB, and then slightly less comfortable with some of the other methods like using drone and backpack equipment. So maybe they just don't want people to measure their land. And of course, all this can be broken out by state and forest land ownership type, but this is just a quick overview. But my colleague, Chamali Rodrigo, she clustered people into 3 clusters, so potential but cautious adopters. So they had neutral to moderate interest. They were in willingness and competence toward the tools. And they tend to be, have some private concerns. They were moderately engaged in managing their land. Then there's some enthusiasts. So they were comfortable and eager to use any kind of tools, and they were younger, had more education, larger landowners, maybe more financially secure, but they weren't as worried about data privacy, and that was nearly 50% of the folks. Whereas there were skeptics who had smaller land holdings, older traditional landowners, and they were more concerned about their privacy and less, more skeptical about these tools and everything. So what are barriers to landowners using this technology, just from our surveys that were preliminarily analyzed and from feedback? Accessibility came up, and I think I've heard it in these discussions. Getting some of this data is really expensive. Your average landowner is not going to buy a drone. Some might, or some might not be able to use it. Of course, like Jinha's platform, that helps to bridge the gap a little bit because they can actually access and process the data. But then there's technical accessibility. Lots of people do not know how to use these tools. Either they're available as they are right now, or they don't even know where to begin. And you have to be careful of how these tools are created to think about who might be using them and if they can access it, and maybe you don't want them to. Some mistrust the data. So, like we said, people go out and measure the actual tree. So when you bring them these images, they don't necessarily trust that this LiDAR image or this RGB image can be translated into actual measurements. And that's like an opportunity for education. And then they're just skeptical about different things. So, they don't necessarily know AI. They don't know how it's being used. They don't know what it really means and all these different things. One person said, more data is not better data. So you could see that, they've also been, a lot of these, foresters, professionals, whoever, they've been through a lot of different, the newest things. So they don't necessarily just trust this data because it came, from a satellite and so on. But overall, there's no one-size-fits-all approach when it comes to promotion and use of tools or of digital forestry technology. So, for example, some of the studies found that Georgia's landowners were more open to digital tools. And it could be that there's a little bit more plantation forestry in Georgia. That's what we call pines and lines. So if you drive anywhere, honestly, mostly across the South, if you keep driving, you'll see pines planted in lines, and that's some of your standard plantation forestry. Maine's landowners were more reliant on traditional methods, and they had the greatest privacy concerns, maybe because they're tucked so far away in the northeastern corner of the state, so they feel like they're private. And Indiana's landowners had the lowest interest in digital tools, which is interesting because, as someone said, that many of the forest landowners in Indiana are also farmers, and farmers are actually pretty no matter the age, they're pretty up on the latest technology. So this may just be some of the smaller landowners or the non-farmers. And overall, landowners were generally neutral about digital technology, which is an interesting finding, because we might have thought that a lot more of them would have been skeptical. But they were also just concerned about other issues, so forest health, climate change, invasive species. So maybe their concerns about digital technology are not high up on their list of concerns right now. So just briefly delve into the iterative Delphi study. And this is a study looking at concerns and comments from forestry experts of all kinds. So it wasn't just university folks, it was people high up in state or federal agencies or in companies. It was scientists, who were verified scientists. And the paper is already out, so you can actually read more about it. But just to give you an idea, so these are people who are knowledgeable, who have access, who have education, et cetera. So some of the things that came up from them was that they were concerned about the compatibility of technology with working solutions. So they would say that they're already using some of these software, and new software comes along, they want to make sure those things work together, because we all hate having to have 25 different logins to access different things and have to combine them. They're interested in the efficiency added by incorporating new technology. So specifically, someone said that it'd be useful to make imagery easier to access and less intensive to compile. So yeah, anything that would smooth that process down. And then they're interested in the utility of technology for specific working needs. So the example that this quote talks about is just that there's a lot of climate projections tied to forestry tools, but the information may not be actionable from those tools. So it might be great information, but it's hard to kind of translate into, well, this is what I do. Or maybe they can't make sense of it based on the tool. And then they're worried about they're concerned about the redundancy and over-proliferation of technologies. I like this quote of, it might be Coke, it might be Pepsi, but it's soda either way. So you got all these technologies, and they want to make sure they play together. So you don't have to choose one thing. Are you a Mac person or a PC person? And you went down that path and you can never go back. They want things to play together. And the takeaways from that study were just that access to reliable and high-quality forest imagery is a top priority for forestry professionals. And up to now, it's been very, very expensive to get. So that's any kind of thing that makes it easier is great. And overall, this study found that people were not as concerned about the tools being easy to use or the profitability of the tools, and that didn't really impact their willingness to adopt new support tools. But again, these are the people who are highly educated, have access to resources, so, but it wasn't a big concern. I guess probably because they could figure it out, or they could ask the tech guy. And that, overall, multiple forestry systems and technologies are already known and trusted. So again, they want things to be compatible with what they're doing. They don't want to start from scratch and have to figure all those things out. So as we move forward with this project, and I think even, as everyone moves forward with the digital forestry ecosystem, there's a need to continue to co-produce the tools with practitioners and stakeholders and continue to create awareness about them, because you got to create that awareness so that people know what it is before you can actually get them to use it. And then keep educating them and explaining the concepts. Professional consulting foresters who are working on the ground, they're dealing with a million different things. There's an example. And they're interested in this technology, but it's only one of the many things they have to do. So when you keep explaining the concepts, keep tying it to what they know, they're ready to adopt it. And then again, keep asking them what they think and incorporating their suggestions into final designs, because that's the best way to get the best product. And then you keep doing it over and over again. So a couple questions came up, and I'll thank Chamali for these questions. How do we ensure digital advances do not widen the disparities between small acreage landowners and large industrial landowners? Can we think about digital forestry? Is there ways to implement it so that you don't increase landowners' senses of risks or around privacy concerns? And I think many of us have privacy concerns about all of our lives out in the cloud. And then just making sure that we avoid creating tools that only resonate with the most tech enthusiast folks and then leave the others behind. So we don't want to create too many winners and losers. And one of the things to think about as you move forward as well is that some people will never use your tools, and that's fine. My mom can barely work her iPhone. She's just one example. She's extreme. But there's people out there, they're just not going to use them. But if they're familiar with the tools, they know about it, they trust the data, they're going to be more accepting of the consulting forester working on their behalf using those tools, and they're not going to make him go out and actually measure all those trees by hand because they trust the data. So I will end there. This is a picture from Wednesday afternoon when we had our project meeting, and we made everyone draw successes and challenges and things like that. That's what we do in Extension and Outreach. We make people physically draw things and talk. So thanks for having me.
All right, so we're going to continue trucking along here. We're moving from stakeholder engagement towards operational implementation at city scales. And we'll welcome Frank Mastrobuono from Greenhill to talk to us about From Data to Decisions, Operationalizing Smart Tree Management at City Scales.
All right, second to last presentation of the day. Everybody ready? Cool. All right, well, yeah, my name is Frank Mastrobuono. I'm here with Greenhill. Greenhill is a smart tree inventory company, uses mobile LiDAR for urban tree inventories. And just a quick little bit about myself. I BS in environmental science and management, BA in biology. Got an MBA, kind of took a non-traditional path for somebody who got their career started on the technical side of things. And ever since, I've been at the intersection of remote sensing and forestry. My first job ever, though, was conducting tree inventories, and did that on a paper clipboard alongside data entry into a PDA, so probably dating myself a little bit there. I was the urban forester for the state of Rhode Island for a bit, and that was before I went back to get my MBA. And yeah, spent a lot of time at the intersection of remote forestry and sensing, both traditional forestry, forest carbon, and urban forestry. So just a little bit about Greenhill. Greenhill's main objective is to manage urban trees as infrastructure. So we're able to produce citywide tree data using a 3D visual system of record, attain some insights that were previously unattainable, and we're able to use the technology to enable repeat management cycles. And Greenhill has a partnership with Davey. If anybody was in the urban forestry track yesterday, you probably saw my colleague at Davey, Philip, presenting, as well as Will, Ian from Planet Geo. Hopefully we can tie some of the themes that were discussed together. Really, Greenhill, in the partnership with Davey, brings the technology. We do the tree inventories using the mobile LiDAR. Davey brings 145 plus years of field experience, and really the thesis there is that we can pair emerging tech with deep field experience, and that's how we get real impact. So moving into the actual meat of the presentation, what I'm going to do here is just give you a brief overview of Greenhill's process and the technology it uses, and really going to focus the second half of the presentation on the way that some of our clients are implementing the data and making it actionable. So arborists traditionally have been limited by practicality in the number of measurements they can take when they conduct a tree inventory. In a traditional tree inventory, you might get measurements of height, diameter at breast height, maybe crown spread, and the arborist then going to move into their assessment. So in the quest to make things a little bit more objective, and because a smart tree inventory is conducted using a computer, we're able to get a dozen plus metrics right off the bat without any extra effort. And we are also able actually to make calculations that combine multiple metrics. And we'll talk about that in just a little bit. But really, the arborist can show up to the tree with much more information to base their assessment on. We've got really a lot of different measurements that can be visualized in the platform. And the goal here is really clearly not to replace arborists, but to make their work more efficient and effective. They can actually focus on the assessment if they're showing up to the tree with maybe 10 more data points than they're used to taking themselves, plus other calculations that are based on combinations of metrics. We're actually moving through a much more objective inspection and management recommendation process. And if you are an urban forester and you need to plan your management on more robust data, you can use this technology to actually make your day-to-day a lot more efficient. So if you need to prune or remove a tree, you can determine the equipment that you need from the digital twin without sending an inspector in a vehicle to the site. If you do that every day, multiple times a day, that's a considerable amount of staff time being saved just for scoping out the work that's required to complete the management recommendations at hand. If you get a call about the tree, you can bring it up on the phone while you're talking to the resident, view the digital twin, really get an understanding of what's going on, make a determination. And if you've got road, building, or traffic sign clearance, then you actually can visualize that and have a list of trees to prioritize and work through. And a saying that Davey has coined is that arborists won't be replaced by technology, but those who use it will replace those who don't. And the objective here is just to make the right decision for the right tree at the right time. So I'm just going to tell you a little bit about our process really quickly. In order to complete the scan, we have a vehicle with a LiDAR unit, a 360-degree camera. LiDAR sends about 2 million beams of light out per second, produces the point cloud, and we're actually able to produce a point cloud that looks something similar. This is actually just a shot from Europe. And we're scanning, we're processing the data, we're analyzing it, and then we're actually doing inspections. And that's typically the workflow. There are variations around it in terms of the levels of intensity applied. Talk about that in just a little bit. But that point cloud, we're able to extract the trees, conduct all those measurements, and the end result is an inventory that can be managed in Gree-Hill Trees and Davies Tree Keeper we have an out-of-the-box integration with, or really any other platform. Each tree has its own unique hyperlink. If cities are working in an ArcGIS environment or any other environment like PubWorks, CityWorks, link to each tree can just be carried over via API or data import. Clients own all their data. The point cloud, we do provide a cloud-based platform to visualize that. Most cities don't have the in-house expertise for that. And that's called Gree-Hill Trees. We also have an out-of-the-box integration with Davie Tree Keeper. So the point cloud kind of shows up in a little iframe. We've got a bunch of different metrics that are carrying over, and there's a link between each tree and each application. And we can basically also utilize that in a similar function in any other platform. So Smart Tree Inventory is a little bit about the difference. Obviously, they provide more data. It's more data to base the assessment on, which means that it's actually more time that the arborist can focus on their assessment and their management. And it's not necessarily required to visit every tree. I think a topic of conversation right now is, wouldn't it be nice if standards bodies anticipated developments in technology? Unfortunately, that's just not the way it works. So we can give an overview, or we're going to give an overview of what our clients are doing as far as the real-world implementation goes. So also, we can re-inventory much more frequently. You got a very large city, hundreds of thousands of trees. It's going to take teams of arborists a very long time to get through all those trees. We drive at about 23 miles per hour. It's not 55 miles an hour, but we can certainly inventory trees a lot faster than humans visiting every tree can. So the data is a bit more robust. And just a quick example, I'm not going to go through all the metrics that we have. Just to kind of give you an idea, height, you'd get height, it would be a single measurement in a traditional tree inventory. We actually have 5 different versions of height that we're able to ascertain here. And not only do we have more metrics, but we have calculations that are based on the metric. Those provide information that can actually be used to analyze cohorts and look for relative outliers. Just a little bit about that in a little bit again. And Vitality Score is a beta feature that we've got. We're actually combining multiple different metrics to create a score to be able to rank trees. In some of the emerging research, tree condition is maybe a little bit of a subjective assessment. We do webinars where we put an image on the screen of a tree with a couple of defects, close-up images of the defects, and ask people to just rate condition, and we get 3 different answers. 35% of the room will say fair, another 30% will say good, and then the rest will be split amongst the other options. So tree condition is historically not necessarily a great predictor of tree failure. There's emerging research that shows that dieback might be as well. Vitality scores and attempts to combine multiple metrics to be able to just provide urban foresters a little bit more of a finger on the pulse of how a tree is doing. Plenty of things are still open for refinement as well. We are constantly working with our clients to understand how they're using these metrics, how they're doing operational workflows based off of them, and we're always working with them, taking their feedback, adjusting things, and moving the standards forward. So smart tree inventories, obviously, probably point is that has gotten across that they're a little bit more efficient. Easier monitoring of large populations. We can have workflows around them are a little bit different, and that means that precious time can be reallocated. And we also can repeat the scans much more frequently. Trunk Stability Index, just another quick little metric. It's a beta metric, uses a formula called the SIA formula. It basically predicts the critical wind speed at which the tree is likely to, more likely to have a failure event. Trunk Stability Index is displayed at 50 miles an hour in our platform, but clients can adjust the slider to see how the tree would respond to different wind speeds. And outlier detection. This is probably going to be an important one moving forward for the rest of the presentation. We're able to actually analyze absolute outliers and relative outliers. Examples might be, well, emerald ash borer is present in my community, so let's look at every single ash tree over 10 inches in DBH with greater than 10% dieback. It could be every single ash tree. It depends on the management objectives and the management challenges that are present. And we're looking to, in relative cases, analyze cohorts and compare individuals to similar individuals in the population. And anybody outside of or any tree outside of a standard deviation is one that will be flagged for some sort of inspection. And one of the most powerful features in this new environment with smart tree inventories is the ability to monitor over time. When we repeat scans, we actually can compare from side to side, overlaid the scans from a prior year to this year. This tree, you can see, has got about half its crown missing. If I'm the urban forester and I'm wondering, well, what's going on with this tree, I'm able to navigate through the platform in 3 dimensions, look at the street view, look at the point cloud, and then when we are able to bring up the prior scan, we can see, it'll just happen in just a second, you'll see that their old scan will be presented in purple, and the new scan is presented in the green and brown, able to distinguish the leaves in the trunk. And we can very easily confirm that this tree had a lot more canopy a year ago, and this tree is definitely in decline, something that we should address. We can make that assessment. Looks like there's some power lines nearby this tree. We know maybe, hey, we need a crane. Don't have to send an inspector out to the site physically in order to do that. And we can even bring up the leaf area index on a graph and just quantify how much leaf area index that tree has lost over that course of the year. And bringing this all together now, so what does this mean for the urban forester? Like, yes, we're able to provide a lot more data. There's a lot more to base assessments on. They're much more objective, but how do you make this actionable? And coming back to Ian's point yesterday in his presentation in the urban forestry track, how do we adapt standards when new technology comes available and into practice? And really, smart tree inventories provide more data, but it's just data until an arborist starts to work with it and make it actionable. And varying approaches kind of fall on a spectrum. These aren't necessarily buckets, but really just to represent the range of approaches that are taken. In intensive scenarios, every tree is going to be visited. And similar to when I got my career started and we were collecting trees information on paper with a clipboard and in a PDA, and that was going into a map-based platform, we have similar overlap that we're seeing in the industry right now with this emerging new technology. So just kind of taking you through 3 different points along this spectrum. In an intensive approach, again, every tree is going to be visited. In really intensive cases, that might mean that every single tree gets a level 2 risk assessment. In other cases, it might be that we're doing the smart tree inventory and the city is having arborists visit every tree and only collecting conditions of concern. because all that other data is there. They might be also making management recommendations on top of that. And in Greehill's partnership with Davy, it's Davy's arborists that are doing all these inspections. And we are doing the scan, we are delivering the scan data to Davy, and the arborists are showing up at each tree with that data in hand. So they're focusing on their assessment. So in an intermediate approach, Greehill and Davy perform an outlier analysis. And that allows us to inspect a portion of the trees remotely. And either the client or Davy performs on-site inspections. In an example, it's really more of an observation than a guideline, but 20 to 30% of the trees might get flagged for remote inspection based on parameters that are set as a result of working with the urban foresters to understand their management challenges. And it might be that emerald ash borer example, it might be just based off of different outliers in the population. And then the point of those remote inspections, sometimes there might be relatively simple issues that can be prescribed a management action for right away, but in other cases, it might actually be that the tree is flagged for an on-site inspection. And anywhere between 5 to 10% of the population will wind up getting flagged for that on-site inspection. And that is one of Davy's arborists going out, visiting the tree, doing a full assessment and making management recommendations there. And the final step is obviously to take whatever management action is recommended as a result of those inspections. And so in a hands-on scenario, the city's gonna be totally independent. They're using their own internal resources. They might have their own preferred contractors. Davy might actually be writing a management plan for them, and they might be executing that management plan. And that's all their undertaking. So just a quick little overview. Philip, my colleague, presented this yesterday in the urban track. There's a case study that Davy did when Las Vegas got their first scan. So they were on a block-side pruning program. They were doing a block-side pruning in 1/5 of the city every year. So every 5 years, they'd visit the whole city. In that type of a program, the contractors are incentivized to touch as many trees as possible. And it's not necessarily the most targeted maintenance program. So when Davy took the calculations of the cost of their status quo management scheme, which is that 5-year pruning cycle, projected it over the course of 10 years, it was about $18.4 million. Now the city has a scan. We're actually doing the second scan this season, and off of their first scan, they followed this remote inspection to on-site inspection workflow. They are doing targeted maintenance based off of that scan, and they have the confidence that every tree is going to be revisited in 2 years. So taking a much more targeted approach and spreading those costs out over the course of 10 years, now that cost is $13.9 million. So not only are they preserving more urban forest by taking less tree canopy out, they have $4 million approximately more dollars in their budget to spend on expanding the canopy. The impact of that financially is very significant and can't be understated. So just to wrap this in a full circle, I guess, the 2-year cycle that we talk about is as you see on screen. We're going to scan, we do the inspections, we plan and budget and act. And in year 1, we're doing the scan and the inspections, and high priority trees are getting taken care of right away. And in year 2, we're doing a little bit more of the planning, a lot more targeted maintenance, doing structure pruning, things like that. And again, arborists have the confidence knowing their trees are going to be revisited. You are an arborist or an urban forester standing in front of a tree, and you know that this tree is not going to be revisited for 10 years and it has a potential issue, you're going to be very aggressive. You're probably going to remove that tree. If you know that it's going to be revisited and at the very latest 2 years, then you might be a lot more comfortable with being targeted, monitoring this tree, actually scheduling visits in between that timeline. Spend less, plant more. Very simple. Healthier, more mature urban forest overall, and you're expanding your canopy goals a lot faster. So that's all we've got for today. Thanks a lot for listening, and we will catch you all at the break. If anybody has any questions, we've got a booth. Feel free to stop by.
All right, we're getting close. So we have one final speaker, last but by no means least. We will have Robert Keefe from the University of Idaho talking to us about networking challenges and solutions using digital twins in operational forestry.
Okay, hello everyone, and thank you so much for giving me a chance to talk. I'm excited to be here, and I'll try to move quick. I know lunch is waiting, but I'm super excited to attend. I love this topic. I love all these topics. I wasn't able to be here yesterday because of a grant meeting in Seattle, but I'm really glad to be here today. So we've been chipping away at digital and smart forestry stuff for a while at the University of Idaho. When I was a grad student back in the early 2000s, people like Paul Gessler and Lee Vierling and Andy Hudak and others were doing a lot of early foundational LiDAR work, and I was a grad student, doing a master's at the time in forest biometrics, and I picture today when we'd have this great single tree data. It seemed like it was right around the corner that we'd have a single tree inventory for forestry that we could use. And then it seemed like it took 25 years or so before we actually really got there. And now we have it, and have been bounced around through different jobs and different research in biometrics and silviculture and forest operations, and ended up on the faculty. I'm an associate professor in forest operations at U of I, and I also direct our University of Idaho experimental forest. So I have my hands in a lot of things in that role, and gonna talk to you today about a little bit all of the above and speculate a little bit about the future and what lies ahead. So I use the term smart forestry a lot, and when we talk about that, we're usually thinking of a forest in which we're making decisions based on data that's collected with sensors, transferred digitally, and we're making decisions in real time. It's not just we're gonna use LiDAR, map these trees over here and look at it later on and write a paper or something like that. We really want to be getting those data in real time and using them to make decisions. And so we work with our students. I work with our students a lot. I was cutting trees yesterday for a few hours in between the meeting in Seattle and coming here, and our students are out logging today on our school forest. We have a student logging crew we've had for 52 years, and it's fully mechanized with modern equipment, and we do a lot of prescribed burning and planting and other stuff. And so as we do these, if we're thinking about smart forestry, we might, in a smart forest, we might be collecting kestrel data or air particulate data on a purple air sensor or something, and broadcasting that around so people can see it on their phones, and they're gonna make decisions about this prescribed burn as it's happening. Or when one of our students is operating this TimberPro feller buncher, they're gonna be actually looking at single tree mapped inventory, which we have for the entire 8,300 acre experimental forest, going back, we have LiDAR going back 20 years, and we have had this single tree inventory. We've been working with a few iterations of it for about 7 years now. The first was 2019, working with Northwest Management. And so each of those dots is a tree with a diameter. It's a shapefile in ArcGIS, and each dot is a tree with a diameter, a height, a crown, a species. Red are Douglas fir, orange are grand fir, yellow are ponderosa pine. Dark green are the valuable ones. Those are the cedar. And so as me in this case, as I was in that feller buncher cutting that tree, I could look at a very simple level at an Avenza PDF map with those dots on it, and I could see the tree that I was cutting beforehand. Or I could use other ARC tools very simply and click, and I could delete that tree in a very simple way if I wanted to after it was cut. We want to get better at that, and we want to be able to trace every tree from the stump when it's cut through the feller buncher, the skidder that drags it to the log landing, the processor that turns it into logs, and then trace each one of those logs to the mill where it's going to go. We have really great sensing and data exchange that happens from the mill on. Our mills in Idaho Forest Group CAT scans every log that comes through, and they can see external and internal everything about it and trace each 2x4 from then on. But we don't do very well from the woods to the mill, and we want to improve on that so we can know the qualities associated with those trees, where they came from, what we might want to plant there in the future, things like that. And it's a neat forest that we work in because of the variability, and you'll see that as we go, but the variability in species mix and silvicultural systems and logging conditions, it makes for a complicated mess, and it's really fun to do research in that area. So we have kind of everything on the spectrum. You've heard a lot about it in the last day or two, and we're working with all of the above. And so these are stand polygons, traditional forest inventory on the left. This is, again, about 3,300 hectares, 8,300 acres, and then the single tree inventory on the right. And for me, I've managed this forest. I've been responsible for it for almost 15 years now, and I'm used to driving through and seeing stands and saying, oh, that's a ponderosa pine plantation. And even though I've walked through them over the years and stuff, I really have made a lot of mistakes with that and not realized the variability of species within those. Even if they were plantations, natural regeneration has come in with different species. And for me, it's been very useful having single tree operational LiDAR to work with. We harvest about 450 truckloads of logs with our students each year, and so it's very actively managed. And having these dots changes how you think about operations. It changes how I think about setting up our landing. And an example would be, we have about 8 species that are going to go to different mills in the region. Industrial forestry might have 25 different sorts that they're going to sort at the landing, and with different log diameters and species mixes for different products. If you were looking at that picture on the right, you might say, rather than cutting these and bringing them all to one place and then sorting them out, maybe we'll take the dark green ones to this spot over here and take the red ones over here, or do things like that. This is our new permanent plot network that we established for the purposes of pushing the boundaries of smart and digital forestry in the future. And it's 154 plots that cover the forest, and we've mapped those plot centers in high accuracy. Each one has a steel pipe in concrete, so it's not going anywhere, and then we mapped each tree in 10th-acre plots around those. And our goal is to measure everything all the time in increasing resolution in the future. And so we have TLS, we have ALS going back to 2003 was the first acquisition on the forest, and things like acoustic sensors, things like game cameras to get at different kinds of data, not just fixed data, but movement data. This is our 2019 ALS on the left, and then Geiger mode on the right, and up top you can see that first full acquisition in 2003 up to 2019, and how things are getting better all the time. But that's all static, and we really care about the movement stuff is what we need to get better at. And so tracing that tree from the feller buncher cutting it through the skidder, through the processor to the mill is a challenge that the Europeans have been working on for a while, and they're a bit ahead of us. And but we're kind of unique in the US here because we have whole tree harvesting equipment. It's different equipment, it's a different system than the cut to length that's typically used in the Scandinavian countries and Europe. So we have a little bit of work to do to figure out that tracing system through. This brings in this kind of active operations and active use of data in real time means that we need not just great remote sensing, not just smart people doing an awesome job with remote sensing, but we need networks in the forest. We need a way to exchange data in real time, and that exchange becomes really important because latency latency issues, and it may not matter all that much if we're thinking about getting tree information to the mill. You may say, who cares if we get it 5 minutes later or if there's a little bit of a delay. It matters when we look at safety or life safety or situations where a person could be hurt. And a lot of our research, a lot of my lab's research for the last decade has been under the CDC, under the National Institute of Occupational Safety and Health, to help come up with solutions to save the lives of loggers and keep them from getting injured. If you work in forestry in general, and in logging in particular, you're 28 more times more likely to die on the job than the average worker. And so when we get equipment and people on the ground moving around in the same area, people tend to get hit with trees or hit with equipment at times, and particularly in steep slope logging where we have cable operations bringing trees up the hill. And so a lot of our work has been trying to figure out ways. This is one of our regional loggers that came out and worked with us there for a bit, Songlin. And one of the ways that we've tried to get at that is to come up with solutions that work without cell service, but allow us to share data in areas like most of the inland Northwest US and even the Pacific Northwest in general. We just don't have cell service when you get out in the woods away from cities and stuff, or if we do, it doesn't work down the hill in steeper areas. And so we need a way to see where people are located. Cable logging operations are dusty, or there's vegetation and you can't see people, or there's a contour down the hill and the operator up top can't see where the people are located down below. The slope on this particular unit I measured with a clinometer was 120% slope all around that hill, so very, very steep. And when the machine starts to pull trees up the hill, they may hit someone if they're standing too close to it, and that's one of the leading ways that people are killed on logging operations. Hand falling with chainsaws, cutting trees the old-fashioned way is still done on steep slopes like this, and that's also one of the more dangerous things you can do. So what we've always wanted to do is to be able to see those people moving in real time and let the equipment operators see them. And so we've published quite a few studies over the years on real-time mapping systems that pair a GNSS device with a radio transmission and beam it back usually to your phone or to a tablet in a machine so that people can see where operators are, or see where ground workers are walking around below those machines. And you can start to do these neat kind of point pattern analysis and things in real time, like how often are they too close to the machine or too close to a snag or too close to trees that are being moved based on two objects moving in real time with GNSS. And you can give alerts. You can say that person is too close to a hazard, send an alert or make the phone or the watch buzz and say, get away from there. And so this has come, we've been chipping away at this a while, and the technology is improving around us, and one of the big improvements is Starlink. And so having Starlink at the job site makes it possible to at least have a nice network somewhere close by as far as you can send Wi-Fi. That doesn't cover a whole logging operation, but it covers maybe right around the landing where the main equipment is there. And what we can do is we can pair that high-quality Wi-Fi data from Starlink nearby with lower quality or lower bandwidth, the radio transmission of GPS signals of the workers, and bring those together. And one of the tools that lets us do that is ATAC. If anyone has a military background, you may be familiar with ATAC, but it was the Android Tactical Assault Kit developed by the Department of Defense, and it's what's used by special forces to see where everyone's located as they go into a tactical operation. That's now released to the public and openly available, and it's now the Android Team Awareness Kit. But ATAC is very, very good at bringing together different spatial data sources, especially moving objects, people or equipment, which is it's very similar on logging operations to what happens in military operations with lots of moving parts. And so we use ATAC, and we've done quite a few studies to try to understand the quality of the GPS signal, what affects the GPS signal error, the horizontal error, and what affects the broadcast transmission error? What happens if, for example, we're broadcasting every 5 seconds versus every 1 second? And if you have a couple of missed signals when someone's walking toward a machine, you can go quite a ways in 15 or 20 seconds if you have 3 or 4 missed dots. And so those things matter quite a bit. And we've looked at how vegetation affects both the satellite transmission and the horizontal transmission. And just to show you what these are, these little devices with the carabiners are about the size of a cork, and those are GNSS units with a radio transmission. And so they would just clip on a belt and send the location to that other receiver up there. Over time, our research moved from just using a location to using things like your phone. The IMU sensor on your phone is monitoring you all the time, or it can, and you can use it if you've ever used a step counter or something like that. It knows as the sensor bounces up and down when you walk, you can figure out how many steps you're walking using random forests or things like that. We started using those to pair work activities with the IMU sensor data and say, can we predict reasonably well that someone's cutting a chainsaw or cutting a tree with their chainsaw or walking to the next one based on those IMU sensors? And we can predict that very well, actually. And we can do the same thing with smart watches, and this is the basis of a large grant we have with the Pacific Northwest Ag Safety and Health Center at the University of Washington right now, and we're developing basically the work activity profiles of loggers based on a Garmin smartwatch. And so the watch is aware of what they're doing at all times. And so then we can take data like the GPS location that says this cutter is over around the corner working with a chainsaw a mile away, and we know that he just walked to a tree, we know that he's cutting a tree, and then the dot stopped moving and his heart rate also skipped, and a bunch of metrics show as incorrect or something is wrong, and we can then send an alert to the other people at the job site and say, go check on Bob, it looks like he might have had an accident, it looks like he might have been hit by a tree. And that's a life safety application that's very important, it's very useful, otherwise they might find Bob at the end of the day because he doesn't show up, and that's too late. And so that kind of application, data transfer really matters, and having good networks really matters. And so GNSS, if we're thinking about geofences as a safety application where someone's life will depend on it, forest canopies affect GNSS error a lot. And so this is 3 units zip-tied to wooden stakes. The top 4 are in clear cuts on the school forest, the bottom 4 are in mature forest canopy, and they're sitting there for 30 minutes, and that's how much GNSS moves around for these particular units over 30 minutes. Here, looking at, kind of stand basal area or quadratic mean diameter and other density metrics versus sort of the sources of error with either GNSS or transmission among multiple units in a network. And we are trying to look for patterns now, having done several of these studies over time, to see what are the factors that matter. So this is local on the school forest in different conditions. And those little narrow radios are called GoTennas. They pair with your smartphone using Bluetooth and then establish a network without cell service. This is looking at 25 different PLSS sections, a much larger area in the Clearwater Basin, where at each one we've gone in and set up 5 radios zip-tied to wooden stakes over that whole section and then walked across from one corner to the other. And we look at how often is the network connected. So these GoTenna radios are required on type 1 wildland fires in the United States now. This is the main tool used to locate where engines are or people are if a fire is coming. And we found in this study that all 6 phones and the GoTenna were connected only about a third of the time. So there's something going on in places where they're disconnected for a different reason. That's a life safety issue. We need to do better than that. Similar study with one of my master's students just finished up on the school forest again with Starlink. What are the issues that affect Starlink? And again, we find kind of different issues with satellite connectivity above and transmission of the Wi-Fi, 2 different things horizontally. And I guess to summarize a bunch of stuff on this, what canopy affects things coming from satellites in a pretty big way. We know it from our lab and lots of others, Dr. Bettinger and lots of others doing horizontal accuracy research with GNSS over the years. We have not found a great silver bullet for moving, when you're moving through the woods. We haven't found a good way to get around that, and other than to do something a little bit innovative recently, which is really mapping individual trees ahead of time. When we have those ahead of time, we can actually use those tree locations rather than the satellites as the basis for being able to position something. So if we have ALS data and we've mapped all trees on a 8,000 acre forest, why try to look through the canopy to connect with satellites that are a long ways away if that's really difficult to do when we can use the dots themselves and use the actual tree locations themselves? And so that turns out works pretty well and is the basis for the Tree PS system that we're moving away. Dr. Hippa, I wasn't here to hear Dr. Hippa's talk, but very similar paper also recently came out from Finland. And for data transfer with Starlink, the biggest thing is really that you just can't connect very well through the canopy. And so putting the dish in the open, in the clear cut, in a landing, somewhere like that, and transmitting at a pretty high rate horizontally is a better way to go with that. And there's a couple papers coming out on that, but we've just found that tends to work better. This matters because companies like Kodama Systems are now they're teleoperating logging equipment. Skidders are operationally being teleoperated over Starlink on Weyerhaeuser ground in the United States, not in the Northwest, but in the Southeast. And so if we're going to have someone controlling logging equipment miles away over a satellite, we need that signal to be good and not to fail. As we go to AI solutions with the equipment operator increasingly relying on AI to look around and see, is there an endangered species here? Am I getting too close to the stream over here? Is there a better way I could cut these 5 trees that would make more sense? That requires a lot of data exchange, and so to be able to do that, we need not just the good collection of data, but we need the ability to network really well in the forest, and that is almost there. That is still an area that we need to improve on quite a bit. This particular slide is kind of where we're headed in the future. If we can look to the future and the exciting things coming down the line, this trailer on the top left is our new incident command kind of smart forestry trailer where we would have something like the ATAC view on the top right on a large wall size monitor, smart monitor, showing everything happening at a logging operation while you're there so we can see it. And the trailer on the bottom right is our equipment simulator trailer, one of 2 that we bring around for high school workforce development to get kids interested in forestry, and they can run the machines. Those 2 are coming together now, this year for us, and we want, when kids are operating the equipment, we want a couple things that haven't happened in the past. We want all of them working in our virtual experimental forest. So based on the LiDAR data, it's a fully virtual reality forest, 8,300 acres, and they're cutting real trees, not just simulated ones. The simulated trees are based on the real measurements physically. And the multiple operators are working with the same environment so that the one student is cutting with the feller buncher and the other is grabbing that tree with the same tree with the skidder. That's a big step forward from where we've been. And this was the first iteration of the fully virtual experimental forest 5 years ago, and then we're working on the second or third version now based on the actual ALS LiDAR. And our goal is to have that fully interactive and functional by the end of this year. And that's a little bit about where we've been and where we've headed. And I'm going to just skip ahead and say that we have great data, but what we really need are great networks to be able to use it operationally. And to get at that, I already talked about the transmission, so I'll skip ahead and just say that with 2 new positions we are excited to be pitching the first fully virtual interactive operational research forest. So sensors based on the equipment telling what's going on, not just flying overhead. And tracing products all the way to the mill, and very interested in collaboration in the future. Sorry to go a few minutes over, and I know it's lunchtime, so thank you so much. Yeah. Thanks.
Yeah. All right, I know we're late for lunch, but hey, I'm gonna beg your indulgence. I do want to call the other speakers back up, and we'll take just a few minutes for questions, and then I have a couple of announcements before you're done. Okay. All right, any questions for Jinha, Leslie, Frank, or Robert?
Okay. I just have one quick question for our second last presenters. This is Zhang Wu from Taiwan National Technical University. Actually, in Taiwan last year, we have several students. They were killed by the falling down trees. So our government pay a lot of attention on this kind of challenges. So, and you mentioned about the trunk stability index, right? So my question is it possible for us to apply this kind of index to determine like the falling down trees, or to determine unhealthy tree, even to determine the risk of falling down? Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I'm sorry, the microphone was echoing a little bit, so could you just repeat the question?
Yeah, my question is it possible for us to apply the trunk stability index to determine the risk for a tree for falling down?
Yeah, so this is the trunk stability index is a beta feature, and it's a beta feature because it's actually based on physics equations that assume nearly perfect shapes of the tree. So the trunk stability index is probably more of a tool that's useful in anticipating the impact of a potential storm event rather than looking at individual tree failure. At the moment, you know, it can be a useful metric, and we're providing it for the informational purposes for our clients to utilize, and that can be utilized in conjunction with a thorough examination of a potentially risky tree by an arborist. Because if we have identified a tree that is potentially risky, especially if we're considering its potential for failure being, you know, at least probable, then the arborist is going to be working through an inspection workflow that's holistic, and it is a single data point that can be utilized to determine, okay, if this tree is likely, if the trunk stability index drops below 1.5 at 20 miles per hour, that's a pretty light wind, and it might push the arborist to make a decision to remove and replace rather than to try to perform some sort of more targeted maintenance. That's really the extent of the application that it's been utilized in, to my knowledge, and you know, it's labeled as a beta feature for a reason, because it is relatively untested. It's a new, we've yet to have the technology to remotely sense the metrics necessary to feed into that equation in a way that is practical. So yeah, my best recommendation would be, if someone's considering using that, to use it inside the context of a holistic assessment by an arborist.
Other questions?
I have a question for Frank. When you scan these trees, are you not including trees that are occluded by houses, like some trees that are in the backyard? And then also, how do you determine species?
Great
with these
question.
scans?
Yeah, sure. So the answer to the first question, how do we, are we including trees that might be on private property? There's a whole stage of the project scoping process before a project even goes into production where we're working with the city. You know, we're trying to get as much information from the city as possible and as data-ready a format as possible. So ideally, we're actually getting right-of-way boundaries from the city, and that determines our area of interest. Sometimes those equations are actually just rule-based, where the city might say, our right-of-way boundaries extend 10 meters outward from the road center line. And sometimes it's different on a roadway-to-roadway basis. You know, 3 or 4 lane roads might have different right-of-way boundaries than smaller roads. There's a whole process where we scope all that out. That being said, it's certainly possible for us to include trees that are on private property, and in many cases, some cities, they might have some sort of a private tree setback planting program, and maybe that's grant funded, and they actually want to track those trees. And in this type of scenario, the city might be paying for trees, actually furnishing trees to a homeowner and signing an agreement with the homeowner that they'll carry out certain types of maintenance, like at least watering, and they might want to track the progress of those trees to ensure compliance with the grant program. They might actually have reporting requirements if that program is grant funded. So in that case, you know, again, it's probably rule-based. The city might say, include every trees in a separate, what we call management zone, so that you could separate out private property trees versus public right-of-way trees. And in that case, you know, it's all predefined, and it's to the city specifications. We're not necessarily limited by range in the cityscape. An ideal range for the distance of the object to the scanner is 30 meters. A little bit further than that, we can, you know, certainly get valuable metrics. And we actually do plan on wider roadways to scan sometimes multiple passes. So, for example, with 3 lanes in each direction and a median in between, we might travel the outside lane, the inside lane, and then in the opposite direction of travel. So we're actually trying to capture as highly resolute a scan as possible. How do we determine species? Another great question. It's a machine learning model. It's a global model. The model takes into account the point cloud and the images from the 360-degree camera. There is a confidence score that's provided along with the prediction that the machine learning model makes. Anything less than 90% gets flagged for review by what we call a species validator. It's somebody that is based typically in the region where the scan took place, and they're sitting at a computer looking at the point cloud, looking at the images, and they're making a determination to either confirm or correct the prediction made by the model. Any corrections are fed back later on into the model, and the model gets better over time. So certainly when we travel to a new area geographically, there might be a higher rate at which the species need validation, and you know that improves the predictions over time. There's certainly regional variances and things like that. So hopefully that answers your question.
Okay, I don't want to cut the questions short, but I want your lunch to be hot. So we're going to stop the questions there. I think our speakers will be around for lunch, and so if you didn't get a chance to ask your question, please track them down. Let's thank our speakers again. All right, I have just a couple of announcements as we come to a close here. Thanks to all of our speakers. We really appreciate all of the thought-provoking and insightful talks. A reminder, if you guys still have a poster upstairs, to please take it down by 4 o'clock today. We will be distributing a survey. It should show up in your inbox sometime in the next couple of hours. Please fill that out. That feedback is super useful to us. We will have bins at the reception table in the back. If you want to recycle your name tags or the lanyards, you can drop them off there. And lastly, I want to take a moment to thank the team that put all of this together. Nancy Kramer, Amy Winger, Amy Blake, Josh Jackson, and Jackie Getson have been working tirelessly for, I think, 6 months on the thousands, tens of thousands of items on a to-do list that it takes to put together a conference like this. So let's give them a round of applause. We've also had an enthusiastic team of grad student volunteers that have been running around behind the scenes, making sure everything operates smoothly, so let's thank them as well. All right, I don't want to be the last one standing between you and your lunch, so I'm going to cowardly invite Song Lin up on stage to have the last word.
Thank you, everyone. And let's give Brady a round of applause. Keep us on the stage. Thank you. Lunch is here, and have fun. I hope to see you next time.